Hey folks, it's been a big year for Nikon. The Z8 was a massive hit despite the problems it's facing in the last few months. And I think the most hotly anticipated camera now has to be the ZF. Now, there's so many rumors out there about this. What I'm sharing today is some new specifications and photos and video that Nikon rumors have just put live, so credit to them. I'm not in the rumor business. This is their bread and butter, putting out this kind of content. I have to say, I think putting out a retro camera in 2023 would be one of the most difficult things to do right. But looking at the specs, other than one or two little things, and of course the I wish list that is never ending, I think it looks like, if this is accurate, that they've done a really good job. Just quickly folks, if you're not already, please do subscribe to the channel. My channel's been around for 10 or 15 years now, and it's kind of stagnated. I got to a huge number of subscribers, and I don't know if people even bother subscribing anymore, but it does help when I'm talking to brands and trying to get in equipment to see channel growth. So if you enjoy the content, please do like and subscribe. Now, it kind of reminds me, thinking about how difficult it is to do a retro camera well, of the Fujifilm GFX 50R. This came out at a time when this kind of medium format camera at this kind of price point was really rare. There was the original 50 with the gigantic back on it. DSLRs didn't have 50 megapixel sensors in them at that time. It had the great rangefinder styling, but getting the balance right that's going to satisfy enough people to make something commercially viable, I think, is really difficult. This is, as hot as the ZF may be, it won't sell as many as like a Z6 III or a Z8. It is going to be a somewhat niche product, but you need it to be as widespread a niche product as possible. I mean, when we look at something like this, which may be one of the design inspirations for the ZF, this is my old ZFE. What is it that we actually love about it? Is it simply the look? Is it the interface? Is it the way the buttons operate? Or is it just nostalgia that when we were a teenager or university using it, we missed that time in our life? If they just put a digital sensor in this, would I be willing to pay a couple of $1,000s for it, when for similar money, you can get something like a Z6 II, which has video and tracking and better ergonomics, that kind of thing. And the sleek, pared down design of these cameras, because they only needed film at the back, not really, a tiny battery, but not any electronics and stuff in there, with no grip on there, putting modern Nikon lenses, like this is the smallest one, they become an ergonomic nightmare, something that this guy also suffered from. Now, if you're in the Nikon Z system, check out my expert setup guide. I'll have a link below. It takes you through every camera in the system, showing you how to initially set it up, how to get the most out of it for your style of shooting, and a complete menu deep dive that shows you every single option and when you'd want to take advantage of it. And as soon as the ZF is released, I will be updating the guide to include that as well. Check it out below. So, I think they've hit a really nice balance on this camera. First of all, take a look at some of the pictures that we have above. I think the styling looks really good. It says that it's going to be coming in at, 700 grams, somewhere around there. Yep, including the battery. So a little bit heavier than the Z6 II. It does have video, it does have some different features, but not at the same level as the Z8 or Z9. And I know that there's a lot of people who are interested in a ZF who, A, don't care about video, or B, vocally don't want it to have video. But again, you have to put out a product that's going to appeal to a broad enough base. If I can get this for $2,000, but for $2,500, I can get something that has way more features or the same features, but at a lower price point, you start to question whether you should be putting a value on the aesthetics of the camera. So let's just run through the specs and say. So first of all, if this is all true, I think it's really boding well. Now, the earlier rumors saying that this was going to have the Z8 and Z9 sensor and autofocus at $2,000. I said it then and I'll say it now. That's absolutely ridiculous. There's no reason the Nikon would do that. That was never going to happen. And I couldn't imagine that they would use the same sensor and autofocus as those cameras have, even at a much higher price point, because why make a third option there when those two are already selling so strongly? But I was hoping that we're going to see the X-Speed 7 processor, not X-Speed 6 or dual X-Speed 6s, because that gives you a whole lot more capability to expand the camera with firmware that we're limited with the Z6 and Z7 Mark IIs. So they're saying X-Speed 7 processor, big win. Same LCD and EVF as the Z6 Mark II. You know, a lot of this stuff I'm sure people wish would be upgraded, but I guess this is going to be, it does look like an upgrade over the Z6 Mark II, but then they need headroom for the Z6 Mark III when that finally comes. My guess would be 2024. It's going to give you the option to shoot HEVC video, 10-bit. It'll do 4K 30, but in 60p you have a crop, so there's a limitation coming in already. 1080 up to 120 frames per second, so again, not doing what the Z8 and Z9 can do. AF, it's got 273 points, but it does come with some features from the Z8 and Z9, like 3D tracking, something that people who were DSLR shooters will be really happy to see, because that is kind of a Nikon classic, the 3D tracking. A magnesium alloy body, that's probably contributing to why it's heavier than the Z6 Mark II. It's also got HEF mode, mechanical or electronic shutter curtain. It does have IBIS, maximum shutter speed of 1/8000. Nice to see they haven't hamstrung it, if this is true, compared to, say, the DF, which had a 1/4000th maximum shutter speed, and a 24.4 megapixel backside illuminated, but I would say non-stacked sensor. It's going to have all the usual stuff, power direct charging and that kind of thing. Two things that I find curious on this spec sheet. One, they're saying that it is going to use the same battery as the Z6 and Z7, the NEL15, which that would have to go in, I guess, kind of parallel to the body to fit, given the size that it's going to be. If that's true, then bravo. They've obviously had to do a lot of reorganizing inside the camera to make that work, because it doesn't have the grip bulge for the battery to go into. And I think that's going to be great, because a camera like this, there's always going to be some little shortcomings, and the thing that people love to throw shade, whether it was Sony in the early days or any camera, is, oh, but the battery life is so terrible, you need to carry a whole pocket full of batteries, that kind of thing. If this is using the NEL15s, they just have an amazing amount of juice, and it should be a camera that you can just get by with the one battery for a normal day of shooting, or one spare for a heavy day. Especially, you're not likely to be doing hours and hours of video content on there. If you are, then you might want to be using the Power Direct USB-C. The other, let's call it, interesting point is the rumors that they've been sharing now, Nikon rumors for some time, that it's going to have dual card slots, an SD UHS 2, but then a micro SD card. Now, the way they put it is, then you could think of it as the micro SD, you kind of put it in and then it's so tiny you don't even bother looking at it, and it's like having a built-in SSD in that way. Now, when you think of it in that way, it kind of sounds neat, but the reality is micro SD, they're just not that fast. Now, yes, if they put the very best slot in there, there are some UHS 2 and V90 micro SD cards. There's not many of them though. Most of them are significantly slower, but they're still going to perform slower than your full-size SD card, which is, again, much, much slower than a CF Express Type B card is. So just keep that in mind, that whatever they end up putting into this guy in terms of frames per second, you're probably not going to be able to do raw to both cards and expect it to have a great performance. But again, it all, when people say, I did it myself before, saying you're not going to be doing hours of video. Some of you will. And I was about to say, most people probably aren't going to use this as a sports camera, but the reality is, and comes back again to why you need a camera that hits the mark really well to, especially for a niche product, to be financially viable. Because for a lot of people, they're a one and done setup. They want a camera that they can take for a walk on the weekend, just to, when they go and have lunch or whatever, and go sightseeing and go to the museum, and that they can take to the birthday party, and that they can use when their friend is doing motocross or whatever. It's one camera for everything. Not everyone is a maniac with a bunch of different cameras sitting around that they can use for sports or studio or street or whatever. So you need something with that broad appeal. And I honestly think that if the card isn't a limitation for people, and in that way we do have two rather than just the one, and if the battery turns out to be correct, then I gotta say, I think it looks good. Taking a look at this video, which has about the same amount of credibility to me as photos of Bigfoot and UFOs, could you make it any wobblier? But I think it looks fantastic. The last and important test is going to be, how does it feel in the hand with modern lenses on it? Because that is really important. For me anyway, having a camera that has the ergonomics of a VHS cassette with no lens works fine. Once you put a honking great lens on the front, like imagine this with a 51.2 Z lens. All of a sudden, this svelte thing that we remembered from, years ago when we were shooting, it's just not the same anymore. It's a completely different proposition, and trying to hold this with basically no grippage becomes a serious issue. So it'll be interesting if they make an optional grip available for it. I'm sure others will at some point. But how it feels in the hand is going to be the big test for me. Now, I wouldn't be making this video if I knew something that I wasn't telling you guys, so I haven't seen one. I haven't had any confirmation of specs. I don't know how they are, but as soon as they're available, I'll be doing my very best to get a loaner in so I can do some testing and present it to you guys. So let me know your thoughts on this camera. Check out the setup guide and 1 week in Bangkok below. I'll see you guys soon.